Let's find out what a real-life comedian thinks. Paul Cox, welcome, Paul.
Hello, Kevin. How you doing? Good evening.
Good to see you, mate. Where do you stand on this? Rosie Jones, very brave lady. Look, let's be fair. She suffers from ataxic cerebral palsy and puts herself on the line night after night doing stand-up. Good for her. Respect, respect. But she seems to take a very po-faced view of comedy and humour. And she said that Ricky Gervais and Jimmy Carr, for example, she said this in an interview for Attitude magazine, saying that they are privileged cis white straight men and they shouldn't be making jokes about, for example, trans issues because they're not trans, they don't have any lived experience. She says it's just your privileged cis white straight men who open their newspaper and go, oh, people are talking about trans people. I could know a bit about that without experiencing it at all. To those boys, I'd say, with respect, shut the F up. She's entitled to her view. Now, my view on comedy is there should be no subjects in the world that you cannot make a joke about. Now, you might make a really tasteless joke about something horrendous. Now, I might be very offended by that. Unlikely, actually, but I might be. And somebody else might find it hilariously funny. Do you see what I mean? So, you know, all jokes are all things to all men. What's your view? Are there any areas that you should not ever tell jokes about?
No, there are no areas you should never tell jokes about, Kevin. That's the whole point of comedy. Comedy is exciting. That's how it's meant to be. Comedy's become so accessible in the last 10 to 20 years via social media that all of a sudden everyone thinks they own it and it should look a certain way. When I first went to comedy, perhaps even when you first went to a comedy club, Kevin, you went to a club, it was in a basement somewhere, it was exciting, there was somebody there inevitably telling jokes about things that were a little bit on the edge or that you could relate to, or about something that you perhaps wouldn't say or have said to someone in confidence. Look, Rosie Jones and I actually started comedy almost exactly the same time. I remember seeing her on the open mic circuit in London, and you're right to say that it's brave of her to do so. I hate to use the word brave, actually, but it's great for her to do so because it's a communication sport, comedy, and it's difficult for someone with cerebral palsy to communicate. Where her and I divert is when I don't believe we should be telling anybody what to say at any point.
Agreed.
And Rosie seems to be comfortable in doing this. At the same time, she's saying that Ricky Gervais and Jimmy Carr can't talk about someone or something that they've no lived experience of. She's telling cis white men, whatever on earth that is, Kevin, that they can't or can do something. So there's hypocrisy immediately. There is only ever one true judge of comedy, and that's the audience. Now, if we look at this purely as an economic situation, on face value, Rosie Jones, Jimmy Carr, Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais has just won a Golden Globe for the very comedy special that Rosie Jones is criticising him for. There is a massive audience for Ricky Gervais. There is a massive audience for Ricky Gervais. And Ricky's exceptionally clever, by the way. These aren't just route one jokes. These are jokes that he has considered and he has analysed, and he is very comfortable. Do not cross a line that he sets himself. Now, we all know that comedy is tragedy plus time, and it's very difficult, particularly...
I like that.
But for someone like me who, you know, I talk about this sort of stuff quite a lot, and on X maybe, if a big event happens, immediately sometimes I want to make a joke about it. But I will hold back because I've learnt very quickly that it loses its value particularly if people have died or if it's been a tragic incident. No matter how funny that joke could be, there just hasn't been enough time. But the idea that you couldn't joke about a subject, for me, is ridiculous. Comedy needs to be preserved. It's the only way, particularly in the environment we now exist, where you can actually hear the truth. In some of Ricky Gervais's previous stand-up specials, he's talked about trans issue from the perspective of a man, which is what nearly all trans women are. Men. He's talked about the immigration issue from the perspective of somebody still on Dover Beach trying to help women and children out of a dinghy. Turns out there aren't any. And these are all true things. And that's what makes... Kevin, that's what makes us laugh, though, isn't it?
That is making me laugh. I mean, do you remember a couple of years back, Paul, that Jimmy Carr, I mean, perhaps testing the limits of exactly what we're discussing in one of his stand-up routines to a big audience, big theatre audience, made a joke about the Holocaust. Do you remember that? And there was one hell of a row. And respect to Jimmy Carr, he turned around and said, I don't care. He said, I thought it was funny. The audience laughed. And for him, he said, the only criterion is this. Is the joke funny? Never mind the topic. Is it funny? If it's funny, then it's valid comedy.
And I totally agree. And whether you and I appreciate that joke or not, it is inconsequential.
I'll be honest with you, Paul. I'm not going to repeat the joke.
No, don't repeat the joke.
I'm not going to repeat the joke, but you know the joke I'm talking about. And I'm not proud of myself, but it did make me laugh.
Well, of course it did. But that's the point, isn't it? The whole point is, irrespective of what society has told you, you should and shouldn't like or shouldn't find funny, you did. It's a natural response. That's why the audience is the best judge, because it's involuntary, that response. You didn't think, oh, I hope he says something bad about the Jews. That's not what the joke is, by the way. If you start looking at it through the perspective of this whole sort of woke paradigm or multiculturalism, or, you know, be kind to everybody. By the way, everyone who says they're being kind is never being kind. Rosie's not being kind in that article. She's saying there is a certain type of comedy and these are the rules for which you follow. Who wants, I don't know anybody who wants, imagine that on the front of a comedy club. Inside here is rules-abiding comedy. You will feel
the rules of comedy.
But it just doesn't make sense. By the way, I'm not obtuse here. Rosie Jones has an audience. Of course she has an audience. And good for her. And there will be many people that don't think like me, that think that what she's saying is perfectly acceptable. And power to them. But it's not for me. And by the way, it's not for the vast majority of people either who see comedy as an escape from all that nonsense.
Yeah, as I said, I keep saying, you know, Rosie Jones is a very brave young lady. You know, she's got ataxic cerebral palsy, and she goes out and puts herself on the line night after night to a live audience. You know about that. Nothing more terrifying than standing. I mean, I haven't done it for comedy, but I've performed before live audiences quite a few times, and it's a fairly terrifying experience. And I can imagine if your mission is to make that audience laugh, that's even more terrifying. I mean, the sort of stuff I do, you can chuck in a joke now and again and get a laugh, but that's not my main, you know, I'm doing politics discussions, things like that, not particularly serious, but, you know, that's one thing. Having to make an audience laugh must be terrifying. Have you ever sort of stood up there and hopelessly failed in that endeavour, found an audience that just didn't find you funny, you started making jokes? Have you ever had that, the sort of kind of the tumbleweed experience? Tell us about it.
I absolutely. I'll give it. Look, I've been doing comedy now for 12 years. I started on a London open mic circuit. I did something called, I'll give them a shout out actually. I did the Comedy School, which is in Camden. And you can go along and do a 6-week course in stand-up comedy, and all the money goes towards charity, right? Yeah. So I want to champion those. But following that really warm experience where I went to the Backyard Club back in 2014 and stood in front of 100 people and did the first 5 minutes of comedy I'd ever written, and they all applauded me and said I was great. I went straight from, because, you know, everybody was very accepting of what we were doing and how new we were. I went straight from that to something called the Lion's Den in Shaftesbury Avenue. No longer exists.
Yeah. But it really was the Lion's Den, right?
But it was called that for a reason. And I paid £5. £5
go on.
to go on stage and tell 5 minutes of jokes to absolute silence. The previous night I'd said the previous night I'd done it at the showcase thinking it's only a matter of time before I get my own TV show, Kevin. So I strolled into this open mic comedy club and died, essentially. And
what's that like? What's that like, Paul? That must be desperate.
Okay, so it can
lonely, right? Lonely.
But, well, it can be, and it is. I'm not denying that it's not, but it's a rite of passage. You have to do it. It's like any career. You need the rough and tumble. Yeah. You need the cuts and bruises to get on. You know, you didn't become a broadcaster overnight. You have to go through some bad interviews or some bad times in front of an audience or whatever it is.
Me more than most, I'll tell you.
Well, I would like to say, Kevin, I think you're fantastic. But what I would say is I enjoyed the process. So that happened, and I felt for the first time this is what I want to do with my life. This is exactly what I want to do because I enjoyed it. And that audience, whether they were right or wrong or not, an open mic audience is usually made up of people who just happen to have walked past or were in the, you know, rumba class an hour before and didn't want to leave. It can be, or you've been dragged along by a friend. But I also am a host of my own comedy club, so I MC. If you've ever been to a comedy club, you'll know.
Yeah, I've been lots. Yeah, I'm so old. I was there in the originals, in the alternative comedians back in the day. I saw sort of Rick Mail, Adrian Edmondson, Dawn French, Jennifer Saunders with an audience of about 12 before they made it big. So I remember those days. So conversely, Paul. When you've got an audience in the palm of your hand and they're laughing at everything you say, is that an extraordinary exhilaration?
Yes. Both can become out-of-body experiences, actually, particularly when you're failing. It feels like you can watch yourself doing it and think, I'm glad I'm not him, and then you suddenly realise you are him. but conversely, when you're on stage and it's just going well and anything you say has really got them going, it just feels incredibly natural. There's no hesitation in your mind. You know what you're going to say next, or if you don't know what you're going to say next, it's presented to you in your mind in a matter of nanoseconds, and it's a wonderful feeling, and you go along with that, and you're never thinking really, what is it I should and shouldn't say.
I'll tell you one thing, Paul, that strikes me. I'm not talking about Rosie necessarily. I've never seen her act, so I'm not qualified to comment, but. I see a lot of these young people. It seems to be it's a new thing that young people in their 20s and that say, I'm a comedian, I'm a stand-up. And you see their act, you see them, and you think, you haven't got a funny bone in your body. And there's a certain type of person. You have to be, don't you, a certain type of person to be funny. You have to be a genuinely funny kind of person, because so many of these young comedians, I don't think they've asked themselves this question, am I funny? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and I think that's because there's a whole generation of people that aren't doing it to be... It's the first thing that surprised me when I started doing it. I'm now in my... I'm 46. I was in my early 30s when I started comedy.
No, 46?
I'm 46, Kevin. Yeah. Unbelievable, I know.
But enough of your waistline. Carry on.
So, yeah.
See, I could do this. I could do this. I could do this stand-up stuff, you know.
I'm not offended either. It's very funny. But I was surrounded by a lot of young people who I suddenly realised weren't doing comedy because A, they thought they were funny, or B, they wanted to be funny. It was a conduit to something else.
This lecturing.
They wanted attention. They wanted, and you know, I'm a comedian. I want attention too, but I want it to make people laugh. That gives me something, and it gives the audience something.
Yeah.
I've often met lots of comedians who want to send a message to the world. And you're like, what do you want to send a message to the world for?
Yeah.
We got Keir Starmer for that, and look what he's doing to the country.
So the headline on this, Paul, great talking to you, is there should be no rules about comedy, and you can make a joke about anything. And by the way, you know, you said about, you know, it would be a bit ridiculous to make jokes about a tragedy that happened yesterday. If a terrible tragedy happened today, 50 people died in a train crash or something, nobody would make a joke. In a week's time, they start coming out, don't they? Black humour.
Absolutely.
Always happens. Always happens.
And this is it, isn't it? It's pathos. It's how we deal with life.
Tragedy plus time, what you said, yeah?
Tragedy plus time, Kevin. Absolutely.
Paul, fantastic to talk to you. Come on again soon.